So welcome everybody to yet another of our KRC lectures. I'm very happy that I can introduce my dear colleagues, especially the main star of today, Dr. Henry Abramson, the Dean of Touro College and our scholar in residence, and David Lawrence, who is the director of Kosher River Cruises, and my name is David Kraus, and I'm the European director. And again, I'm very happy that we are meeting here on this lovely, for you, morning. For me, since I'm in Prague, it's late afternoon. And the talk of today is going to be the Jews of Portugal. The Sephardic diaspora and the heritage is undoubtedly one of the most fascinating, the most complex, highly original and unparalleled phenomena of the Jewish world. And not only, as I mentioned, it is a diaspora within a diaspora, if you will, but also it entails a complex phenomenon out of cultural, ethnic, religious, and even linguistic and dietary heritage, which some of these things will touch today. The history of the Jewish community in Portugal specifically plays an indispensable part of the Sephardic heritage. And perhaps without us even realizing it on day-to-day basis, some aspects of it influence us even today as Jews. And speaking of today, of course, there is history, but there is also a bustling and ever-growing Jewish community in Portugal of today, including one of the most, specific, within a specific segment of the Jewish people, one of the most unique Jewish communities that could be found anywhere in the world, which is the Jewish community of Belmonte, which probably are the last Marranos, the secret Jews in the world. So without a further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Abramson, who is going to talk about some of these aspects, and especially some of the phenomena that are related to the actual cruising route of our Be'ezrat Hashem soon to happen cruise on the Douro River.
Great. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate the introduction. And I have to say, I am like so thrilled to be speaking with you about this upcoming trip. My wife and I were very excited to travel to Douro with Kosher River Cruises with David Lawrence and David Kraus a couple of years ago. And it's such a fascinating place to visit. And especially after being cooped up so long with the COVID-19 situation going on, we're really excited to get back to more of the life as we knew it beforehand. And let's hope that, God willing, all of the news about the pandemic continues to go in a positive direction so that we'll be able to safely make this cruise. The plan for today is I'm going to make a presentation of probably about 20 minutes or so. That's going to be an overview of the history of the Jews of Portugal, just to give you some kind of historical context for the places that we will, God willing, be visiting in just a few months. And then David Lawrence is going to speak a little bit about, what are the arrangements for the cruise, and maybe give us some more sense of what's going on in Portugal, what's going on with the preparations. And Malcolm is heavily involved in creating those delicacies for us. And then after that, David Kraus will take over and will manage questions to either myself or to either of the Davids Because this is a webinar, you can communicate with us and with each other through the chat function, and we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. David Kraus will be managing those questions after we are done. Okay, so let me take about 20 minutes or so to give you a very quick overview of the history of Portugal. I'll just share my screen here. I don't think that worked. Let me try again. Sharing the screen. Yes, and hit share. Does that look right? David, do you see my screen with the boats of Portugal and things like that?
I do, Henry. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is actually excellent. This is a photograph that I actually took on the trip when I was with my wife and Kosher River Cruise a while ago. This is the opening of the Douro River. Just behind my shoulder would be the Atlantic Ocean, and here we're looking inland from the city of Porto, also pronounced Oporto, but you'll see it either written with the letter O at the beginning or just the word Porto, a very important Jewish city. So let's have a look at the overall geography. Here's Portugal, of course, is on the western edge of the Iberian Peninsula. There you can see that beautiful view of the Douro River in Porto as well, with that gorgeous bridge from the 1920s spanning it. And Jews have a long history there. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see that this map indicates all of the places where Jews lived before the 15th century, quite a number of very significant locations that we'll be talking about, God willing, on the cruise. But just to point out a few in particular, Lisbon is, of course, the capital of Portugal and has a very strong Jewish history. We will also hopefully be visiting Coimbra. We were able to visit it last time. That's actually a very important university town in Portugal. They have one of the oldest schools in Europe there and has a strong Jewish history. There is Belmonte that David Kraus referred to. I'll show you a picture of it a little later. That is one of the most unusual places because an actual community of crypto Jews, also called Moranos, although they prefer not to use that term, managed to hide out for 500 years. And they were so used to hiding that when they were discovered in the 20th century, they actually thought they were the last Jews left in the world, which is kind of amazing. But here is Porto, right at the mouth of the Douro River. Douro River basically takes the top fifth of Portugal, and it flows from the west to the, from the east to the west into the Atlantic Ocean, and we'll be following it upriver, and then we're going to get on a bus, God willing, and head into Spain to go to Salamanca, also a very, very important city in Jewish history, and then we'll take the boat back again. It's also a fascinating river on a geographic level because it has the world's highest lock, which is quite an experience. It's especially nice when we plan to do it in the daytime. These locks are these mechanical devices that essentially allow river boats to negotiate the differing levels of the river so that you don't hit any rapids and things like that. And you actually, it's basically a water elevator, and you get into the lock and the water will raise the boat up something like 200 feet in the air, which is really quite impressive. But that's more for the trip. Let's go straight to the history of the Jews in Portugal so we can understand a little bit about what happened to them. We have early evidence of the Jews in the Iberian Peninsula in general, not specific to any particular location in Portugal, but it tends to be secondhand evidence. Like, for example, in the 4th century, there's a church council in a place called Elvira, which lists all kinds of prohibited activities for Christians and Jews, including, the church prohibits Christians from taking meals with Jews and with fraternizing with Jews, and some really interesting things like forbidding Christians from asking rabbis to bless their crops and things like that. And that's one of those things where you get the sense that if the state is really intent on banning something, chances are it's happening anyway. So that's an interesting kind of thing to imagine, that Portuguese and Spanish peasants would have been going to the rabbis and saying, listen, can you please give a bracha for our field, because we really depend on your your spiritual and supernatural intervention. But we don't have too much internal evidence of what's going on in the Jewish community until quite a bit later, in Portugal specifically. More in southern Spain, in places like Granada, and places like Al-Andalus, you see a lot more of what's going on. But in Portugal, we first begin to see something significant about the Jews in the 12th century, when the very first king of Portugal appoints a Jewish treasurer named Yahya ibn Yaish. And this is actually something that happens throughout Europe very commonly. Jews are, I don't know why, associated with facility with finance, and so they're often appointed to these kind of high economic posts. The king, by the way, faced quite a bit of opposition over that decision, but nevertheless he insisted on it, and in fact prospered as a result. Later king, Afonso III, formally recognized the Jewish community. Again, more strong evidence. We don't have internal evidence from Jews and what they did in Portugal that's very detailed, but we know that the king formally recognized 7 distinct communities with their Jewish populations, and once again issued royal protection for those communities in exchange for their services, of course, in particular in the era of tax farming and financial activities. We'll have a lot more to say about the economy when we're actually on the tour, and we'll talk about what Jews did at that time for the economy, but for the most part, they were well received by the royals. And over the next few hundred years, Portuguese Jewry actually developed a reputation for being a community that lived in significant affluence and with the protection of the crown, so much so that when there was anti-Jewish discrimination in Spain, particularly in 1391, when a wave of pogroms, hard to describe in any other way, spread across northern Spain, a lot of Spanish Jews fled to Portugal, including Shmuel Abarbanel, the father of Don Isaac Abarbanel, also pronounced probably more correctly Abravanel. And he was actually, it's shocking to hear this, but he was actually forcibly converted to Christianity, as many other Jews were in 1391, and he fled to Portugal to be able to resume his Jewish identity. So Don Isaac's own grandfather was actually technically a Christian and would have been recognized by a Christian by the Spanish church and by extension also the Roman Catholic Church. But during this time, like from the 13th century to the 15th century, there were just a couple of punctuated moments of taxation and some unfortunate uprisings of violence, particularly in Lisbon. But the general picture is that Jews were increasing in affluence and in authority in Portugal, and it was considered kind of a safe haven in many ways for Jews in Europe. The end of that period, the 15th century, is kind of like the swan song of that period of great affinity between especially the Portuguese royalty and the Jewish community. Afonso V, I don't think they were terribly original in choosing names for kings. There's another name, João, which is one of my favorite names actually. João is spelled J-A-O-A with an accent over, I think, the O. And I'm never sure if I pronounced that correctly, but I always think of like, it must be that when he was born, everybody said, João, it's a boy. Sorry, I'm laughing and I can't hear if any of you are laughing, but I'm enjoying it. So at any rate, the King Afonso V actually faced much more stiff popular resentment of the Jews. There was a lot more violence against Jews, again, sporadic and localized, but sometimes quite intense. Lisbon stands out in special contrast to many of the other sites of Jewish population. But Afonso V continues to protect the Jews, and it retains that idea of being a Rechtsstaat, a society governed by law, that Jews are allowed to prosper. Now, a lot of that was a picture, by the way, of Afonso V. I'm sorry I didn't show you that earlier. A lot of this changes with the Inquisition. And in order to understand the Inquisition, which comes to Portugal in the early 16th century, we have to go back and understand a little bit about what happened in neighboring Spain, highly influential related culture and politically and geographically dominating the peninsula. Spain and the Iberian Peninsula in general, we should recall, is very unusual in Jewish history because Jews throughout Europe and the Mediterranean basin in general always lived in a binary culture. There was always Jews as a tiny minority within a very large majority culture. For the most part, that was Jews living within Catholic Europe or Jews living within Muslim North Africa and the Middle East. And very rarely do you have a much more diverse culture as you have in the Iberian Peninsula because of the influence of Islam. Islam conquers the peninsula from the Visigothic kings who converted to Catholicism in the 6th century. The Muslims conquer it in the 8th century, and they institute a period which is known to many as La Convivencia, the period of great coexistence, which is somewhat exaggerated, but for the most part, it's true that Jews, Muslims, and Christians actually lived in a fairly healthy triangular culture that allowed Jews to flourish, not only economically, as we shall see they did through much of the period, but primarily culturally. And they were able to experiment with new forms of poetic expression and musical expression. And, this is a period where you have great feats of Jewish culture like Ibn Gabiro and Yehuda Halevi and many other figures who have gone on to tremendous prominence. You have in Spain this remarkable phenomenon where you have a Jewish general of a Muslim army who also writes a commentary on Talmud that's studied to this day. I'm talking about Shmuel Hanagid, or Samuel ibn Nagrela, who was a remarkable Jewish poet of Granada during this period of La Convivencia, the coexistence. It has a couple of definitely hiccups, like for example, when the Almohads invade from North Africa, they push great figures like Maimonides, who was still a young boy at the time, out of Spain, forcing them to flee across North Africa and eventually settle in Cairo or just outside Cairo in Fustat. But they're all products of this unusual period of coexistence that lasts for about 200 years. It sinks into decline as the Catholic rulers begin to push their political and military might to the south, eventually driving out the Muslims in 1482. And the relationship that these Christian kings have with Jews is heavily complicated by these pogroms that occurred at the end of the 14th century. I mentioned them a few moments ago. These pogroms had an especially marked phenomenon of forced baptisms, where Jews were, they had holy water sprinkled upon them and certain phrases were recited and they were pronounced Christian. And this represented a very stark shift in the demographics of Christian Europe, because although these Jews were baptized against their will, they were, according to Catholic theology, nevertheless considered Christians. The church was at great pains to say it is forbidden to engage in forced baptism, but once a Jew has been baptized, even against his will, as we see some very tragic examples throughout the centuries, such as Edgardo Mortara, who was literally kidnapped by the Vatican police in 1858, the Jews were nevertheless essentially given Christian identities and Christian driver's licenses. And all of the discriminatory measures that had held them in check economically and culturally and socially, those disappeared. And so you had these Jews who still consider themselves Jewish, still consider themselves part of the community, still observe the commandments and so on, but nevertheless were free to enter universities, to pursue professions they had never pursued before, including rising high up in the church, ironically. And they were also a powerful economic force because they were literate and they were numerate and they were urbanized. And all of a sudden, you had this huge population of Christians who regarded themselves as Jews, who had phenomenal privileges and many ways advantages over their competition. And so there's a tremendous amount of resentment that built up against this, both from a religious perspective, because they were not really following Christianity, they were really following Jewish laws, and also from an economic perspective. In fact, one of the big debates among historians is which of these two issues was primary. Not for us right now, but we can see that both of them were clearly very important. And so what happened was that the church in Spain embarked on the notorious Inquisition, which was not directed at Jews per se, or even Muslims per se, who had remained Jewish and were not forcibly baptized. It was directed at those erstwhile Jews who were now technically Christians, who refused to give up their Jewish practices and beliefs. And it created this horrific Soviet-like purge mentality in society, where people would betray their neighbors to the church, indicating that they were actually secretly Jewish, practicing Jews, and the suspected Judaizers would be arrested, would be tortured, would often have forced confessions derived from them, where they would name a whole bunch of other people who that under duress of torture, they gave all their friends' names and relatives' names and so on. And the purge just expanded wider and wider in Spanish society until it got way out of control. The ritual humiliations that were imposed on people suspected of Judaizing, including, as you see in this famous portrait of an Inquisition trial by Francisco Goya, they were forced to wear these humiliating tunics called sanbenitos, these long conical caps, which were meant to be humiliating and were the predecessors of the witch's cap and even the dunce cap. Some of you may remember those. It was a little bit before my time, but my father told me he often had to wear a dunce cap in school. And they were subject to a whole variety of penalties, including confiscation of property, part of which would go to the church and part of which would go to the people who betrayed them, which of course not only acted as an incentive to betray people, but also as an incentive to betray people falsely. And then, of course, the notorious and awful auto da fe, the burning at the stake for those Judaizers who chose not to repent or to recant their views. Technically speaking, the church did not burn Jews at the stake. They released them to the secular authorities. The term used in the transcripts is they were relaxed to the secular authorities, who then maintained these massive pageants where people would come from miles around to view the scheduled burning of Jews at the stake. This occurred first in Spain, not in Portugal. But what ended up happening when you get to the end of the 15th century is that the chief inquisitor, shown here in black and wildly gesticulating before the king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella, the inquisitors said, you know, after this went on for quite a while, and it just got worse and worse and worse, with more and more people accused, including prominent churchmen and people of means from all kinds of backgrounds, the inquisitor said that, you know, the reason why it's not working is because the crypto Jews, or the forcibly converse, the term in Hebrew is the preferred term, anusim, which means those who are forced to adopt a Christian identity. The term marrano was actually a derogatory term. It means swine, that was hurled at the so-called conversos or crypto Jews. So Torquemada in the black said to the king and queen, the reason it's not working is because they have lots of contact with their old communities. The crypto Jews, continue to send their children to Jewish schools. They continue to go to Jewish classes. They continue to buy kosher meat. They continue to marry either regular Jews or marry amongst themselves. And so the only way to really fix this and to make, to borrow a Nazi term, Spain Judenrein, free of Jews, is if we expel all of the non-baptized Jews of Spain. In this famous portrait, you have the great scholar Don Isaac Abarbanel, who was also a very important person. He was the second highest minister in the financial apparatus of Spain. Like as in Portugal, the finance minister himself was a man named Rabbi Senor, Abraham Senor, who was also Jewish. And Abarbanel courageously attacks Torquemada's policy, as is shown in this portrait here, and demands that Ferdinand and Isabella refuse his request to have the Jews expelled. He is unfortunately unsuccessful. And although Ferdinand and Isabella offer to allow him to stay if only he would convert, like his boss, Abraham Senor, who chose to adopt Christianity. He was an older man in his 80s, and he simply could not bear the idea of being kicked out of Spain and losing all his wealth and so on. But Abarbanel chose to get on the boats with so many other Jews, and estimated somewhere between 150 and 300,000 Jews, and flee the Iberian Peninsula. And that marks the formal end of the Jewish presence per se in Spain, until 500 years later, when they were finally formally welcomed back. Now, this is not to say that Jewish life ended in Spain. There are still the crypto Jews, especially crypto Jewish communities, as we shall see, particularly in Portugal, but formally, this is when it ended in 1492. The Spanish diaspora is horrific. As you can see here, that Jews spread out all over the Mediterranean basin, particularly seeking refuge in Italy, where there were many places that opened their ports to Jews. Also going to Muslim countries, Istanbul in particular was a popular destination, and more liberal places like Amsterdam, which, unlike today, is a very liberal place with all kinds of flexible laws. I'm trying to be joking about this, but it's hard to tell if you're laughing because I can't hear you laugh. And some of them, of course, made their way to the New World. You can see on the left of this map, it says a las Americas, right? So the first Jews, even in New York, for example, they didn't come directly from Portugal, but these were Jews who were forcibly converted, who made their way to Brazil, particularly an island called Recife, and then briefly it came under Dutch control. So they revealed that they were in fact Jewish. This is 100 years later. And then the Portuguese conquered it again. So they said, oh, now we're in trouble because the Inquisition is back. They made their way in 1654 up to America, to New York City, where they presented themselves as immigrants. So this is essentially the Spanish expulsion. But as this map indicates, of course, the easiest place to go, the shortest route overland, does not involve even the mountain crossing that you would have to the north to France, was, of course, to go to Portugal. And so you have a massive influx of Jews at the Portuguese border. There's a little bit of a crisis at the time, but Portugal does not turn away from its traditional position as being a protector of Jews, and so many Jews actually make their way into Portugal. Spanish and Portuguese Jews are often referred to in the same sentence because many of the Portuguese Jews that we're speaking about are actually of Spanish origin who fled to Portugal in 1492. However, what happens there is equally disastrous in many ways. Although they are granted a brief respite upon the payment of fairly heavy entry fees, immigration fees, the King Manuel I, who embarks on a diplomatic policy of uniting Portugal and Spain, and in fact marries the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella in an attempt to unite the entire peninsula, is forced to agree, not entirely against his will, that in order to marry the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, he has to make Portugal free of Jews, just as Spain is now free of Jews. Unlike Spain, Manuel does not want to give up the tremendous financial know-how and technical ability that Jews have in Portugal. And so rather than expelling them, he seeks increasingly coercive measures to try to get them to convert to Christianity, to Catholicism, including, among other really disastrous and horrific plans, he separates children from their parents and ships nearly 1,000 of them, the children alone, off to an island that they were colonizing off the coast of West Africa, Sao Tome, where, according to eyewitness reports, many of the children were literally devoured by the giant lizards that apparently inhabit this island. It's very difficult to actually document that adequately, but we know that hundreds, more than 1,000 Jewish children were sent off and were never seen again to Sao Tome. Finally, in an act of desperation in 1497, he gathers all the Portuguese Jews within his kingdom and forcibly restrains them in a particular location near Lisbon. And it's actually all the ones that were in the area of Lisbon, but the policy applied throughout, and starves them for about 3 days and then forcibly just converts them. And they are now, against their will, just as we saw in 1391, Portuguese Catholics. And there is kind of like a concession where he says to them that for the next 10 years, we're going to turn a blind eye to whatever you do on your own. But within a few decades, the Inquisition comes to Portugal as well. And it is in many ways even far harsher than we saw in Spain. The Portuguese diaspora is distraught, and many of them express themselves in remarkable works, such as this fantastic book that I'm looking forward to talking about with you. Maybe we'll assign some of it as required reading before the trip. Usque's Consolations for the Tribulations of Israel, which is a unique work in Portuguese. It is actually one of the very first works of Portuguese literature in general that describes in poetic dialogue the long history of what Jews have gone through, with an extremely detailed treatment of the Portuguese Inquisition in particular. So Portugal, by the time you get to the middle of the 16th century, is equally bad to what's going on in Spain in the Inquisition. You have 40,000 Jews accused of Judaizing by the Inquisition in Portugal. About 30,000 of them are formally sentenced. 750 autos da fe, these public burnings, are held not only in Portugal, but in Portuguese holdings in the New World. And about 1,200 Jews are burned to death. The remainder are burned in effigy, which was a popular thing to do. Jews' property could actually be seized after death in order to feed the hunger associated with Inquisition. And so burning in effigy was a popular option. And the last auto da fe, the last public burning, was not that long ago. It's after the foundation of America as a country, the United States of America, after the founding of France as a modern state. It was in 1791. And it was only in the 19th century that the Inquisition was formally ended. So just think about the long history of persecution, which is not only in Portugal, it extends to all Portuguese territories and actually to all Catholic territories in varying levels. We're going to have to speak about that on the trip as well. And when we come to the modern era, we begin to see Jewish resettlement beginning around the year 1800. In some places, it's always been there, as David mentioned earlier. The village of Belmonte in the north central part of Portugal is fascinating. This is a photograph that we took when we were last there. You had Jews who were continuing to exist as crypto Jews right up until the 20th century. They were discovered in 1917 by a Polish engineer who was working on a mining project nearby. And someone warned him not to do business with so-and-so from Belmonte because, he's actually a Jew. And this guy, Simon Schwartz from Poland, had said, what, a Jew in Portugal? Seriously? And he went to Belmonte. And, there's lots of jokes you can say at this point. They said to him, funny, you don't look Jewish. But they didn't believe him. They didn't believe that he, the Polish Jew, was Jewish until, they started exchanging a little bit of Jewish geography. And he said the Shema prayer for them. And they said, oh my gosh, you really are Jewish. And that's how the Portuguese Jewish community was really restarted in Belmonte. When we go there, you'll see some amazing remnants of Jewish communities there. Like this is a photograph from the remarkable village of Óbidos, which is, it really feels like a 15th century medieval place with narrow streets and these very quaint kind of street vendors. And here's David Kraus. He's especially good at identifying these architectural remnants of the Jewish community, like this so-called mezuzah scar that shows where a mezuzah might have been embedded in the original, what's the word for the stucco work of this pillar and so on. Fascinating things to see, really. We also see in Lisbon, this is actually, it was unearthed in a renovation of a home for senior citizens. And behind the drywall, they found actually an Aron Kodesh, a holy ark that used to contain the Torah scrolls that were hidden behind some kind of partition so that Jews could continue to pray through the 16th century in this particular location. It was later uncovered. And of course, it's not easy to get to, but last year we were able to get into this particular place, which still functions as a senior citizens home, but has this remarkable remnant of the life of crypto Jews in Portugal. In the 20th century, Arturo Barros Bastos, shown here, came out as a Jew, and there's a lot of interesting parallels, I think, with that phrase coming out, and had himself circumcised and marked the beginning of the resurgence of the Jewish community, particularly in Porto, where ultimately, a couple decades later, they built the famous Kaduri synagogue here, the Mekor Chaim, the source of life, which is a remarkable building. We had the opportunity to visit it last time. I'm looking forward to seeing it again, God willing. Around the, it's very common in synagogues to list Hebrew verses on the walls. So, you read inspirational things like, know before whom you stand and things like that. But when you look at the verses that surround the walls of this particular synagogue, there's so many of them that echo the unique experience of the homecoming of these Portuguese Jews. It's one of the most fascinating Jewish communities in the world, in my humble opinion. I'm looking forward to, God willing, exploring this with you in just a few months. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn it over now to David Kraus and especially David Lawrence, who will speak to you a little bit more about the technicalities of the trip, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, Henry, thank you. Thank you so much. It was, as always, full of information and fun facts, and makes me want to go to the cruise even more. It's such a the way you present things is so unique, and I have to say we are so lucky to have you on board, both virtually and literally speaking. Thank you. So probably before we dip into the questions, I would hand it over to my dear colleague David Lawrence, who has some more information for us on the logistical level. Right.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Henry. As always, Henry adds, he's an integral part of the team and adds something just truly unique. Even when we're walking with our guides and Henry runs up, grabs the mic for an interesting story, really makes it something special that we're able to do on these tours. Why I like Portugal and the Douro cruise, obviously I like them all, but Portugal is one of my favorites just because I like those off the beaten path types of trips that you basically can't do on your own. What makes this so unique is we have our floating hotel coming back for meals, of course, with Chef Malcolm and his crew, and seeing places you really can't see on your own, meeting the Jewish communities in places like Belmonte and Porto, the connections that we've made over the years. David Krause alone, before we started our first tour, I think our first Douro tour was in 2018, made those connections, spent a year just touring the Douro Valley and everything around from Lisbon to Porto, making those connections. And we have those special connections with all the individuals in all of these communities. Always learning, always finding new interesting places every time we go there. So we are truly excited to start cruising again, as I'm sure we're all excited to get out and to start. I just wanted to go over some of the, why this is, like I told you, so unique. The research we've done, the training of the guides, David, constantly in communication with our guides who are with us during the tour and on the boat, giving their unique part of Portugal, both the secular side. And one of our guides even, came to us and said, now I understand why my grandmother lights candles on Friday. She didn't understand it, but she just said that that's what her mom did. So that's what she does. So all these people figuring out that they're actually have Jewish history and heritage within their own families. And these are things that we bring out with not just our guests, but our guides. A big question that everybody has, of course, is with COVID and with the protocols that are in place in Portugal, because tourism is such an important part of their economy. Incredibly strict protocols are in place, especially with the government. The government works with the cruise company. It's pretty incredible. They actually have a container, which it's a UV container, which all the luggage goes in and out before it gets onto the boat for decontamination. Their protocols are extremely strict. If you look on our website under our health and safety, under facts, you'll see the protocols that are always up to date, always changing. Of course, we will only cruise if we feel safe, and it is safe. Cruising has started last June 15th, were the first cruises that began on the Douro with all the cruise companies that are there. And there's probably about 7 or 8 ships that are going right now. And Baruch Hashem, everything is going according to plan. All the protocols are in place. What's unique about, I think, compared to a large cruise ship is that with riverboating, we are always in a kind of our own bubble, which is really nice. So everyone feels safe and secure. Everyone on the ship, obviously, our protocol is, and so is the cruise companies, that everyone has to be vaccinated. That will still be the case when we travel. As of now, PCR tests are needed 72 hours prior to cruising. That's as of now. If that changes, we'll let everybody know. A big question about protocols is coming back to the United States, because you again have to have a PCR test. So the cruise line has a program on board where they'll be able to test people 72 hours before travel returning back home. So that also exists. So we have everything kind of in place. But again, you can call us and we can go over all those protocols that you see. Right now, over the last year and a half, we have over 150 registered participants for 100 spaces. We've contacted pretty much everybody. Not everyone can make a decision now. Of course, when everyone feels comfortable, they can do it. We have about 80 confirmed. Next week, we will be contacting everybody in the order in which they registered to confirm their cabin space. And then they can, if they haven't originally registered with deposit, they will then have a new link to go register for the cabin of their choice based on what is available. So super excited to go. I mean, we're in this business because we get to travel. So we're jonesing to get out and to really, start. Next year is exciting as well. We have our Vietnam cruise is scheduled for January. That is yet to be confirmed as we're waiting for the Vietnamese government to open their borders. But our Seine River cruise in France, which is our tribute to Jewish heroism, World War I, World War II, in July is guaranteed departure. And then our Northern Italy, which is Venice in Northern Italy, on the beautiful La Venezia, it's a brand new ship. We're super excited for that. That's next October. And then the following year, but everything's on our website. You can see that. And again, if you have any questions, please contact us. I'm going to send it back to David. Also, Malcolm says hello to all our past guests. He's unfortunately can't be here. He's just here to look pretty anyway. And again, Henry, thank you so much. Just a little bit more of what to expect when we're on tour. And again, an integral part of, I'd like to say that the Kosher River Cruise team is now complete with Henry, who will pretty much be on every cruise. So we're super excited. Back to you, David.
Thanks, David. Valuable information for sure. Really makes me all this, this experience today. I'm really thrilled, even more so, to be finally in no time on the boat with all you guys and experience everything again, especially based on what you said. We were all locked up for more than a year now, and this is going to be great. One of these things that I have observed in those many years that we are running these cruises is one of the nicest things about it is that day one, not everybody knows everybody, and it's kind of like ice breaking and everything. And as you settle in and you're in your cabin and you get to know the boat a bit, and you start enjoying the program and the company of the fellow cruisers. You're gradually creating a floating kehila, a community. And this is, for me especially, this personally, this is one of the nicest things. I'm so much looking forward to be again part of this floating kehila. So we have a few questions here. Yes, do crew members have to be vaccinated? Is one of the first questions. I think that's a question for you, David.
Yes, all crew members will be vaccinated. Everyone on the ship will be vaccinated. The tour guides will be vaccinated. The bus drivers will be vaccinated. And again, traveling in our own bubble, which is kind of nice. And since this, like I said, I think this is the perfect way to start with Portugal. You're not crossing any borders, except going into Spain for the day into Salamanca. We're taking buses, but again, we're staying. The ship is always staying in Portugal, so all those protocols are kept in place. And since this is off the beaten path, we're really staying out of city centers. The only city center we're going to will be Porto, but Porto is kind of that small city where we're not really interacting with many crowds anyway. But yes, everybody on the ship will be vaccinated.
And also, I shall add, Porto is like on a hill, so there's always fresh air there, and it's close to the ocean. There's a second question. By Morris. So we will know next week about whether we are going.
No problem, guys. I mean, we're gonna don't worry about it. I know everyone's trying to make decisions on what they want to do. So take your time. We kind of threw it at everybody about 2 weeks ago that it is on, and everyone's trying to feel if they feel comfortable going and if they have the time. I'm sure there's a ton of simchot going on because everybody can finally get together. So everyone's waiting to see who's having a baby, who's getting married. So there's still space. Don't feel pressured that you have to make a decision right now. It's just those people can now confirm their cabins at this time. But like I said, of the people who have registered, about of the 104 spaces we have, I would say about close to 80 have confirmed. So that gives people time to make those final decisions.
Thank you, David. And here is another, this is not a question, but Leslie has raised her hand, so I don't know how to do this.
No, you just got to ask questions. So don't worry about the hand raising. If you can, and if you have something later on, you can easily email us too, if you have any questions.
Right.
Great. So I think that's it, right, David? I think that's
everybody's questions. Yeah, I don't think there are any more questions at this point. Do you guys from the audience, ladies and gentlemen, do you have any more questions regarding?
And you can save them for the boat too, because we'll be doing this every afternoon as well. So a lot more information. Yeah, and what's so unique about riverboat cruising is that we're around each other all the time. So whether you're, you know, having dinner with Dr. Abramson or just having some free time walking around, it's everyone gets to know each other. Everyone gets to ask questions. So it's really an in-depth experience. I'm sure what I can tell you right now is probably about 70% of the individuals who are coming as of this time are return cruisers. So probably many of you all know each other. Great. So I'm going to leave it with you, Henry, your last words, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, all I can say is that this is like, you know, both David's and I are saying all these superlatives, and I want to tell you all that are on this call that it's really true. We have so much fun. We enjoy this. This is, you know, I feel I'm so fortunate to be able to be on these cruises, and everything David Krause says about the floating kahila, you know, it's the shul at first. You know, when we start the minyan, people are really careful, but, you know, everyone's talking during davening by the time we're done. So it's like, it normalizes. And we made a lot of good friendships, my wife and I, over the course of these tours. And it is a wonderful experience on every level. On a physical level, the gastronomic expertise of Malcolm is unparalleled. On a spiritual level, you know, connecting with you feel Jewish history so much more powerfully when you're actually standing in the street where Jews walked for thousands of years. It's an amazing experience. And on just a communal level, it feels great to connect with each other as explorers of this long Jewish history. And there are really some wonderful people that go on these cruises. I think that, you know, I don't know if David actually does this on purpose, but everybody has to file the actually I am vaccinated against being a mean person type of thing, right? Just like they file the COVID-19 vaccination forms. Okay, that was a stupid joke, but at any rate, this is
our code of conduct. Everybody loves it. It's our favorite. Just, you know, everyone knows who've been on our boats that it's just laid back, relaxed. And I think that's the whole point, is you feel like a vacation. You know, leave your suits at home. You don't need them. And it's just a way to get to know each other, relax. And especially over this last year and a half, I think we can all use it.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's it. I'm done. Thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you, everybody, so much. This was such a wonderful start of the new week. And I hope I will see everybody on the boat.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thank you, Henry.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.